It is me. Williams, just a little anecdote. I used to go to Kuwait now and again in the preparation of this catalogue, and one anecdote which Nasir said was that members of his family would come round to the house and say, "Oh, you poor man, you're spending too much on your art collection. You can only afford these old carpets with holes in them. Let us throw them away and we will buy you a new set of carpets for your house." My involvement with the collection started in the 1990s, first through Katie Marsh and then meeting Sheikh Nasir himself, and ended up with this catalogue. And the very cover image, I think, shows something of the scope of interest of Sheikh Nasir, that this is it was then a unique fragment of Eastern Iranian slipware showing a figural picture, which was unknown at that time, and I think shows his interest and discernment in not just odd things, but odd things which were quite important. And this was the first of something that has since grown into a much bigger field. The collection that he built is not only filled with, iconic great masterpieces, the Fatimid luster bowl on the left, the Ottoman Iznik jug on the right, and things like that, but other things for which people like me were really grateful, that bringing back from hidden or forgotten collections, for instance, a whole group of Sultanabad ware, of which one is here on the left from the Kalekian collection, which hadn't been seen in decades, or things from the Bahag Degane collection, this fantastic Damascus luster jar here on the right. But masterpieces, yes. But actually, what I found interesting was the extent of the collection in other areas. Sherds, here on the right, a group of sherds from Egypt, of things which don't exist in whole pieces generally and represent a whole area of Islamic pottery that is generally forgotten and not built into the histories which we should be writing, but don't. And the thing that is most terrifying for the museum curator, unglazed ware, which we see here I love this piece on the left because of its sort of, I think it's a mistake, this splash of grays across it, this sort of modernist flourish, but it was what was the pot underneath, and trying to work out exactly what that was. I wouldn't believe everything you read in the catalogue that I wrote on the unglazed ware. Also really important and fascinating to me was a whole group of molds. And on the right, there's here of a very extensive collection of little tools made, not for making pottery, but for making molds to make molded pottery. And on the left, a master mold from which the negatives would be taken, in which the final pots would be made. And from this particular mold, there is a known pot in the David collection and one in Copenhagen. Where are you, Kel? There you are. And one in Tehran. This is already a second generation master, and it opens up a whole new perspective on mold making as a separate skill from potting, and what it means about provenance, distribution, attribution, and so forth. And Sheikh Nasir didn't just allow us, but was actually positively keen for us to look into the dodgy bits in his collection. And as in any collection of any ambition, there are dodgy bits. I mean, Islamic pottery is full of dodgy bits. This was one of his pride and joys, a very rare lakabi dish published by Pesar in 1920, a Syrian 12th century. And when Kirsty Norman, who was employed as conservator there at that time, started looking into it, it became more and more complex. And the more we got into it, the more complex it became. And we had to say to him, look, if we go any further with this, we're not going to put it back again like it was. And he said, no, carry on. And it ended up with this object, which consists of over 200 sherds, of which every sherd is either belongs to the front bit, the front of the plate, thank you, So on the left are the sherds from the front of the plate, on the right are the sherds from the back of the plate. They're all genuine, they all belong to the 12th century Syria, but they don't belong together. And they were patched together, glued together, and made up into this dish. Sheikh Nasser not only was interested in following this, but in publishing it. And I have to say that the chapter in that book by Kirsty Norman is the most important chapter in the book. And long after my historical speculations have become outdated, I think that will be something that goes on. It's full of, everyone should read it, it's full of the dangers you have to look out for when dealing with particularly early Islamic pottery. This is a very modest slide. It just shows the imprint on the book. It was published in 2004. And behind this, there are a number of things that I'd like to say. One is 2004 was 10 years at least after I had been invited to start writing the book. No idea of a deadline, no pressure, just take your time. The collection evolved, the catalogue evolved, we discussed things, and eventually it came to fruition. More than 10 years, and I believe I'm not even, the longest author in producing a text at that time. And that is a sign of a truly great patron dealing with such a publication. The other thing was Manuel Keane apparently had said to Sheikh Nasser, and he took up this suggestion. He said, this book absolutely has to be A4 format. Why? So it's easy for students to Xerox. Not only was that actually adopted, but the book was published, the paperback cost under £25 in 2004 for a book of over 500 pages with 600 colour illustrations in it. It was an unheard of price and meant that it could become a handbook for every student. It wasn't a vanity publishing, it was something of real, I hope, at least in the illustrations and Kirsty Norman, of real use to students, and will carry on. Finally, I found it very interesting that in his preface to the catalogue, he didn't boast of the wonderful masterpieces that he'd acquired or the great rarities. He chose this piece, a rather, first sight, modest bit of Iranian inscribed earthenware of what, the 12th or early 13th century. And he says, and I quote here, that he drew a great deal of satisfaction from pieces that were neither courtly nor costly, as exemplified here. And he said of this, that the freedom and sureness of draftsmanship and design would do credit to Picasso. And I think it does as much credit to Sheikh Nasser himself in his discerning eye, his keen interest, which means for me that his collection will be keenly interesting, is keenly interesting now, and will be keenly interesting for years, for generations to come. Thank you.